My name is Marianne Whitmore. I'm 43 years old. I've spent 2 decades as a senior accountant at a military hospital in Colorado. Most days, my job is about precision, facts, and numbers. But that morning, none of my training prepared me for the call I was about to take. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring hot water over freshly ground coffee. The sun was bleeding gently through the blinds. You'd think it was just another peaceful weekday. But when my phone rang and I saw his name flashing, Caleb Whitmore, I knew peace was a lie. I answered. He didn't even say hello. Marianne, what the hell is going on? Who did this? Everything's frozen. My bank accounts, my investments. Ava got fired. They're saying we're under investigation. He sounded frantic. Borderline hysterical. I looked across the kitchen. My 15-year-old son, Ethan, was calmly eating cereal like this was just another Tuesday. I held the phone to my ear, watching him stir his spoon. My tone stayed calm. Good morning, Caleb. Sounds like you're having a rough start. A rough? Marianne, don't play games. Who sent the files? Who hacked into my accounts? The media's got screenshots. My clients are pulling out. Ava's in shock. 2 days earlier, I had found our son's college fund completely empty. Not drained in small, explainable portions. I mean, emptied. $128,400. Gone. Every dollar we saved for Ethan since he was born. Gone. Vanished. Along with Caleb. That night, when I told Ethan, I expected outrage, maybe heartbreak, but he just smirked, shrugged, and said one sentence I still hear, like it echoed off the walls. Mom, don't worry. I handled it. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But I do now. Because 2 days later, this morning, Caleb called screaming. And I said what I had been rehearsing for 20 years of betrayal. I never thought I'd have to speak aloud. No one destroyed your life, Caleb. You did it all by yourself. Ethan didn't say much as the call ended. He just placed his spoon down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and glanced up at me. There was a quiet calm in his eyes, one that unnerved me more than the chaos on the phone. He took a sip of orange juice and asked, "He figured it out, huh?" I nodded. "He's catching up." Ethan leaned back in his chair, still in his school sweatshirt, the one that said West Ridge Debate Team. His tone was perfectly neutral, like he'd just beaten someone in a chess game he never intended to lose. That's the thing about people like Dad, he said. They never think someone's watching until it's too late. I didn't reply. My mind was already cycling back through every missed warning sign, every business dinner Caleb stayed too long at, every strange look he gave when I mentioned financial statements or college planning. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was how calculated it had all been. While I was budgeting tuition plans and tracking monthly expenses, Caleb was transferring our son's future into an offshore account to impress a woman half my age. Ava Sinclair, his so-called business partner, who worked in PR but had a background in laundering political donations. I hadn't known that part. Ethan had. He stood, took his bowl to the sink, rinsed it, then turned to me. "Mom, you taught me to be honest, but you also taught me how to be quiet and observant." I exhaled. "What exactly did you do, Ethan?" He gave a half smile, not smug, not cruel, just steady. Nothing illegal, just some tracking, some uploading, some strategic sharing. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. "And the screaming?" He nodded toward my phone on the counter. "That's just the sound people make when the truth catches up with their lies." I didn't know whether to be proud or terrified, but I did know this. My husband stole our son's college fund and vanished with his mistress. I was shattered until our 15-year-old son smirked and said, "Mom, don't worry, I handled it." 2 days later, he called screaming after discovering. And we were just getting started. I used to believe we were the kind of family people pointed to and said, "That's how you do it right." Caleb and I had been married for 17 years. We weren't flashy, we weren't perfect, but we were solid, or so I thought. He worked in real estate development. I worked in numbers, ledgers, and compliance reports as the senior accountant at Fort Highland Military Medical Center. I'd spent my entire adult life inside military systems without ever wearing the uniform, and Caleb, he had worn it. He was Army, 6 years active duty, and when he got out, he wore his veteran status like a badge of honor in every business pitch he made. Back then, People admired us. Military hospital, army vet, one bright, respectful son. Neighbors brought us casseroles when Ethan made honor roll. Our names were on the donation wall of the local school gym. Caleb coached Little League before his schedule got too full. I baked muffins for PTA meetings. Our home looked the part too. Warm lighting, tasteful kitchen backsplash, a wall filled with framed photos from Caleb's deployment, my accounting certification, and Ethan's drawings in the middle, protected in gold frames, as if the crayon belonged beside medals and degrees. On the surface, we were that family, and I wanted that to be true. I worked hard to make it so. Every morning, I left by 6:45 a.m., sharp, badge clipped, heels clicking down the hallway of the hospital. At work, I was responsible for millions of dollars in medical logistics, orders, audits, reimbursements, the kind of work that punishes laziness with lawsuits. I was good at it, precise, controlled. At home, I brought that same structure. Budget binders, grocery planning down to the cent, college fund contributions automated into a locked investment account. Caleb often teased me for taking the joy out of money, but he never objected when the numbers added up in our favor. He liked having a wife who knew how to turn $40,000 into $130,000 in a savings account without ever missing a mortgage payment. Caleb, in contrast, had charm, that effortless, disarming confidence people love in a salesman. He made you feel seen, heard, like what you wanted was not only possible, but already happening. That made him good at his job and good at distracting people from what he didn't say. I used to think that was just his style. Looking back, I see now how often I filled in his blanks with my own trust. Ethan was our miracle kid. I had him late, at 28, after 2 miscarriages and a long, quiet battle with guilt I didn't even talk to Caleb about. When Ethan was born, Caleb cried harder than I did. He held him like a soldier carries a fallen comrade, tight, reverent, trembling. That image used to comfort me. I remember once, when Ethan was around 9, Caleb took him to a veterans ceremony at the state capitol. They wore matching pins. Caleb knelt beside him during the wreath laying and whispered something I couldn't hear. Ethan told me later, "Dad said I should grow up brave, but smart. That not everyone who wears a uniform is a hero." That stayed with me. Looking back now, I wonder, was that a warning, a confession, or just one of those lines people say without knowing how real it'll feel years later? To the outside world, we were ideal. But even in a beautiful house with framed memories and smiling school photos, the silence between two people can grow deafening, and it had. Caleb and I stopped sharing real things somewhere along the line. Conversations became logistics, texts about grocery lists. He worked late more often. When I asked how a deal went, he'd just say, "It's handled." He still kissed my forehead every night, but I started noticing how those kisses felt like closing punctuation, not promises. I used to blame the busyness, the teenage years, midlife stress. I told myself this was normal. After all, I still saw his name on deposit lines in our accounts. He still brought home flowers sometimes, like nothing was wrong. But now, in hindsight, I understand. He wasn't trying to keep the family together. He was covering his tracks. And me? I wasn't stupid. I wasn't blind. But I wanted it to be true. I needed to believe the calm wasn't fake. Turns out, it was. Turns out, we weren't the kind of family people should look up to. We were just good at hiding the cracks. Until the day I followed the money, and it led straight to the lie. Ethan was never loud, not even as a baby. While other kids screamed for attention, Ethan would just stare. He'd study your face before he responded. As he got older, his silence became sharper, more deliberate. I used to worry there was something wrong. At parent-teacher conferences, I braced myself for words like withdrawn or antisocial. But instead, I heard the same phrase over and over. He's incredibly observant. When Ethan was 5, he took apart our toaster, not out of frustration, but out of curiosity. When he was 7, he memorized our grocery store receipts and caught a mischarge I hadn't noticed. At 10, he read through the family insurance documents and asked me what deductible meant. And at 13, he told me calmly that one of Caleb's business partners had a different last name than the one she used on her website. I asked how he knew. He just said, her LinkedIn said Sinclair, but her email domain was Lambert. That's not consistent. That was Ethan. Never explosive. Always watching. He preferred spreadsheets over video games, silence over small talk, and chess over football. Caleb used to complain that he wasn't outgoing enough. But I saw something else. I saw a boy with an engineer's brain and a poet's restraint. A boy who didn't rush to conclusions, who never accused without proof, and who didn't need to win the room, just understand it. I made it my mission to nurture that, not to push him to be louder or more sociable, but to help him build a foundation where logic wasn't his shield, but his compass. That's where our late-night kitchen talks began. Just the two of us. I'd sit at the counter after work, grading numbers and invoices, and he'd sit beside me with his math homework, or sometimes a court case article he found online. One night, when he was 12, I asked him what he thought made someone trustworthy. He paused, then said, consistency and clarity. When people lie, it's not just the words that change, it's their timestamps. That made me smile. I told him that in my world, both at work and in life, there were two currencies, transparency and kindness. You could be brilliant, but if you weren't honest, you were dangerous. And you could be kind, but if you weren't clear, you were unreliable. The real strength, I told him, was combining both. He took that to heart more than I realized. By 14, he'd already started writing a guidebook, just for fun, called How to Detect Discrepancies in Everyday Life. It had chapters like When Adults Over-Explain and The Power of Email Headers. He shared it with no one but me. When I read it, I realized just how far ahead he really was. But for all his brilliance, Ethan was never arrogant. He didn't roll his eyes at others, didn't interrupt, didn't flaunt what he knew. He kept it close. Not out of secrecy, but out of restraint. I could see in him the man he'd become, one who'd speak only when it mattered. And that scared me sometimes, not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew the world would misunderstand him. People mistake quiet for weakness. They mistake observation for detachment. But Ethan, he didn't just notice, he felt it all. He just processed it. Differently, he was 14 when he first told me he suspected Caleb was hiding something. It was a quiet Saturday morning. We were making pancakes. He flipped one, then said casually, Dad's been using a different login on his laptop. And he cleared his history, but only for one profile. I didn't say much, just asked him not to go digging. He nodded, but I could see the tension behind his eyes. The restraint. Later that day, I sat him down and said something I hadn't planned. I know you see things I miss, and that's okay, but promise me one thing. When you do find something, don't let it turn you cold. Being right is important, but being kind is essential. He looked at me and asked, even if someone's hurting us? I nodded, especially then, because that's when our values matter most. That became our quiet pact. He would seek truth, I would help him carry it. What I didn't know then was that Ethan would soon discover something far worse than I ever expected. And he would handle it, brilliantly, carefully, but also with more restraint than many grown men I've known. Because I didn't just raise a sharp mind. I raised a principled heart. The signs were subtle at first, so ordinary that I brushed them off. Caleb had always worked long hours. Real estate was unpredictable. Clients called at odd times, and developers often changed plans overnight. So when he started staying out later, taking more calls after dinner, I told myself it was just a busy season. The market was hot. That's what he said. But busy seasons shouldn't smell like expensive cologne I didn't recognize. I first noticed it on his blazer one evening when he came home past 11. He kissed my cheek, dropped his keys in the bowl, and claimed a last-minute investor meeting had gone long. The scent wasn't his usual one. This one was floral, sharp, high-end, definitely not from the bottle I'd given him on our anniversary. I didn't ask. Not yet. Then came the emails. One night, I reached for his phone by mistake. We had the same model, and they sat side by side on the counter. I only noticed when I tapped the screen and saw his lock screen photo, an old picture of the three of us, taken at a cabin in Maine. But the notification on top wasn't from a work client. It was from someone named R. The subject line read, "You left your sweater again." My stomach tightened. I didn't open it. I didn't have the passcode. But I memorized the time, 9:46 p.m., and I remembered his call that night, supposedly with contractors. Still, I waited, hoping foolishly that there was a good explanation. But the breaking point came a week later. I was going through receipts for our monthly expense report, a habit I'd kept since our early marriage, and there it was. A charge from Le Jardin, a French restaurant in downtown Richmond. It wasn't a place we'd ever been together, not for anniversaries, not for work. Events, and the total? $374. 2 entrees, champagne, and a note. Anniversary dessert special. Our anniversary had passed 6 months ago, and we hadn't celebrated it. I stared at that receipt for a long time, not angry, not devastated, just quiet. Like the final click in a combination lock, when all the numbers fall into place. That was the moment I stopped giving Caleb the benefit of the doubt. Not because of the champagne, not even because of the email, but because the man I married, who once sent me spreadsheets to explain our vacation budget, was now hiding receipts in plain sight. And deep down, I knew. The illusion of busy season had just cracked wide open. I'd been meaning to check the college fund for weeks. It was a quiet Sunday morning, coffee still warm, Ethan upstairs finishing a book, and the house unusually still. I opened my laptop, logged into the account labeled Whitmore Education Trust, expecting to see the same comforting number I always did. It wasn't there. Instead of the expected $129,840.12, the balance read $87.64. I froze. For a moment, I thought it had to be a glitch, some display error or wrong account. I refreshed, logged out, logged back in, same number. My breath caught, but I didn't scream. I didn't throw the mug in my hand. Years of auditing, reconciling hospital financials, and identifying 6-figure discrepancies under pressure had trained me well. I didn't collapse. I compartmentalized. I opened the transaction history. One by one, the charges rolled out like a confession. 12 wire transfers, each between $8,000 and $15,000, over the course of just 3 weeks, each labeled with vague descriptions: private consulting, property escrow, debt offset, interim holdings. But they all went to the same account, a Wells Fargo checking account ending in 72-81. I didn't recognize it, and then I did. Because that account had appeared on a joint mortgage Caleb once emailed me about, a second property listing he had shown me years ago, claiming it never went through. But now the routing matched. I pulled up our budget spreadsheet, every figure still color-coded and organized, as I had kept it for the past 16 years. The column for Ethan's future had been untouched since January. That column should have grown, not vanished. I kept going. Late-night hotel charges, 3 hours from our home. Expensive restaurants. Boutique charges in a city I hadn't visited in over a year. Still, I said nothing out loud. Instead, I opened Excel and began matching every transaction to a timeline I cross-referenced with Caleb's supposed business trips. The overlap was almost perfect. I made a secondary sheet, tracked ATM withdrawals, cross-checked mileage logs from his phone's GPS backups. Yes, he had left that wide open. Each layer was worse than the last. But I didn't rage. I didn't storm into Ethan's room or Caleb's office. I sat with it, quietly. Just me and the evidence. By mid-afternoon, I had built a financial map that prosecutors would envy. 3 tabs, color-coded, with a list of flagged vendors and accounts. One name appeared in several transfers: Helena R. Slater. I remembered it from somewhere. I Googled her. A licensed interior designer, former Navy logistics technician, served with Caleb for 6 months overseas. No mention of a husband, but plenty of social media photos, some of which featured a watch I bought Caleb for his birthday. There it was. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the method, the precision, the entitlement. He hadn't stolen out of desperation. He had planned it, calculated each withdrawal, masked them in vague labels, and trusted I wouldn't notice. That was the insult. Not the betrayal itself, but the assumption that I wouldn't be thorough enough to detect it. He forgot who I was. I wasn't just an accountant. I was a forensic bloodhound in heels. I'd balanced 9-digit military hospital budgets under congressional review. I'd found decimal errors that saved my team entire departments. And now, the same skill set that helped save programs was being used to salvage my son's future. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a clean Word doc and typed out a header. Financial breach, Whitmore Education Trust, internal report. Below it, I wrote, primary suspect, Caleb D. Whitmore. Motive, embezzlement, concealment, adultery. By the time Ethan came downstairs asking about lunch, I had printed the document, labeled each account with sticky notes, and backed everything up to an encrypted drive I kept in a locked filing drawer beneath the floorboards. I turned to Ethan and smiled. We'll have grilled cheese. And later, there's something I need to show you. Because this wasn't just about what Caleb had done. It was about what I was going to do next. It happened faster than I expected. 2 days after I uncovered the truth, I came home from the clinic to find Caleb packing. Not in secret. He was doing it in broad daylight. Standing there in our bedroom, casually folding shirts into a duffel bag, like he was heading on a weekend trip. No panic, no guilt, just efficiency. He didn't look up when I stepped inside. Going somewhere? I asked, my voice even. He paused briefly before zipping the side pocket shut. There's a property deal I need to oversee in Charlotte. It could take a while. I nodded slowly. Charlotte, that's where she's based, right? He froze then, just for a second. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. Still, he didn't meet my eyes. I'll be back soon, maybe in a week or 2. You're not coming back, I said simply. That stopped him. He finally turned to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw the full weight of his dishonesty sitting on his face. Tightened jaw, restless eyes, lips twitching like he wanted to say something but couldn't decide what version of the truth to go with. You knew, he said, like it was some great revelation. I knew, I confirmed. I know about Helena. I know about the education fund. I know about the second account, the hotel bookings, the lies. Silence. He took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself. Marianne, it's complicated. No, I cut in. It's not. You made a choice. You stole from your own son. And now you're walking out the door without so much as an apology? I didn't want to hurt anyone. I laughed softly. You emptied your son's future and called it not hurting anyone? He reached for his suitcase. I'll wire the money back once things stabilize. I just need some space right now. I watched him move toward the stairs. Something in me expected a final plea, a moment of shame, a flicker of old love that would at least try to explain. But there was nothing, just silence and zippers. As he reached the door, I said one last thing, quietly but deliberately. What are you going to tell Ethan? That stopped him at the threshold. He didn't turn around, didn't say anything, just gripped the doorknob like it might offer him the words he didn't have. I waited. When it became clear he had none, I walked over and opened the door for him. You don't get to disappear without answering that. He hesitated, then stepped outside without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. I didn't chase. I didn't scream. I didn't call after him. He hadn't earned that. What he had earned was the silence of a woman who had nothing more to give him, not her trust, not her pain, not her presence. Later that night, I sat at the foot of Ethan's bed. He was doing math homework, headphones on, lost in his own world. Dad's gone, I said. He pulled off the headphones. Gone where? I didn't lie. I think he's starting over somewhere else. He looked at me, really looked. Calm, composed, too mature for 15. Then he simply nodded. Okay, no tears, no tantrum. But after a pause, he added, Did he say goodbye? I shook my head. Number. But I asked him one question before he left. What? I looked him in the eye. I asked him what he planned to tell you. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that I would never forget. Maybe I'll be the one to answer him someday. And with that, he put his headphones back on. I stood there in the doorway, watching the quiet strength of the boy Caleb had underestimated, and the man he'd just given me permission to raise without his shadow. The house was quiet after Caleb left, almost too quiet. I hadn't realized how much space he'd taken up, even in silence. His absence felt heavy, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't grief, it was clarity. The fog was gone. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door he'd just walked through minutes earlier, when I heard the creak of Ethan's bedroom door. Turned slowly. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the doorframe, watching me with that calm, analytical gaze that was so uniquely his. He'd heard everything. I didn't need to ask. For a long moment, he just stood there. Then he walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch. His eyes never left mine. Finally, he asked quietly, "Do you want the money back, or justice?" His voice was steady, not angry, not broken, just seeking the truth. I took a seat across from him, folded my hands in my lap. I didn't answer right away. "I want both," I said. He nodded, like he expected that. "But not through rage," I added. "I don't want revenge that burns us up in the process. I want something clean, something that lasts. I want to make sure what he did doesn't get to define us." Ethan tilted his head. "You mean legal action?" I nodded. "Legal, strategic, measured. He took something precious, but we don't have to sink to his level. We don't have to get loud to get even." He was quiet again, thinking deeply. "You taught me that transparency and decency are more powerful than anger," he said softly. "Are you sure that still applies here?" "It especially applies here," I said. "Because if we don't live what we believe, when it costs us the most, then it never mattered to begin with." Ethan leaned back on the couch. His expression had changed, still calm but sharper, like something had clicked. "Then we'll do it your way," he said. "Our way," I corrected. "You're not a child anymore, Ethan. And this was your fund, your future. I want you to be part of how we reclaim it. But we'll do it as a team." He looked at me for a long time, then finally gave the faintest, most thoughtful smile. "All right, Mom," he said. "Let's get to work." That was the moment I knew Caleb hadn't just stolen money. He had handed us a mirror. And what we saw reflected back wasn't weakness or loss. It was resolve, calm, calculated. The kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. It just moves forward. It started with a USB drive. Ethan handed it to me like it was just another tool. Nothing dramatic, no ceremony. A small silver stick of plastic and metal, slightly scuffed at the edges. I looked at it, confused. He said simply, "I backed up Dad's laptop," before he changed his password. My breath caught in my throat. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" "I did it a few weeks ago," he replied, his voice even. He left it open one night while he was making a call. I noticed some folders he tried to hide, so I cloned the drive, just in case. He said it like someone who was used to thinking ahead. I stared at him for a beat. "That's not exactly legal," he shrugged. "Neither is what he did." We sat together at the dining table, the USB now plugged into my laptop. Ethan navigated through the files with the precision of someone far older than 15. He'd named the folders clearly: transfers, credit activity, accounts, not ours, logins. Each one told a story I hadn't known I was already living. I opened credit activity first. The first shock hit fast. Caleb had opened 3 credit cards under my name in the last 6 months. All maxed out. One of them carried a limit of $25,000. I'd never seen a bill, never signed a form. But the digital authorization, forged. The email trail, created using a dummy inbox that mirrored mine, but with one character off. I felt sick. Next, transfers. That's where it got worse. Line by line, I read the movement of money. Large sums shifted out of our joint savings account, the one meant for Ethan's college, moved slowly over time into a private account I'd never seen. A name popped up: Whitestone Development LLC. A shell company, registered under Caleb's name, but listed under my SSN. He didn't just drain our savings, he made it look like I had helped him do it. Ethan leaned in, scrolling for me. "This one," he said, tapping a file titled Statement Quarter 2. It was an internal document. Caleb must have created it for tracking or taxes. At the top, in his handwriting, was a note: "Ensure transfer remains invisible. Use Marianne's ID for backup line." I sat back. It wasn't just betrayal. It was identity theft, financial sabotage, fraud, crafted using pieces of me. I clenched my hands into fists, then forced them to relax. No rage, no chaos. Stay in control. Beside me, Ethan waited. You did the right thing saving this, I said quietly. I wasn't sure what to do with it, he replied. But I knew you'd need to see it. In that moment, I wasn't just a mother or a betrayed wife. I was an accountant, a strategist. And now, a woman holding the one thing Caleb had never expected me to have. Proof. Legal proof, intent, method, motive. I can use this, I said aloud, almost to myself. Ethan nodded. What's the first step? I looked at him, my son who barely spoke at school but noticed everything. Who, even in the middle of a quiet heartbreak, had the clarity to act. We take this to a lawyer, I said. We start a paper trail, freeze the damage. And when the moment's right, we tell the story on our terms. He tilted his head. You mean, go public? I looked back at the screen, then out the window. I mean, let the truth do its job. Pause. But first, we finish gathering everything. Caleb had built his web carefully, but he forgot one thing. Spiders don't check for children watching in the corner. Ethan had been watching, and I had just woken up. The folder named Contacts was the one that broke whatever sympathy I had left. Inside it were screenshots of messages, a few Zoom call screenshots, and then a PDF, a compiled bio of Caleb, written in a polished, sterile tone. Is that a media brief? I asked aloud. Ethan nodded. Keep reading, I scrolled. The PDF was labeled Nuco Public Image Draft, for Ava review. Avenue, I hadn't heard that name in years. She used to run public relations for a nonprofit working with veterans. I met her once at a fundraiser Caleb dragged me to, charming, sharp, politically connected. I remember her smile, deliberate, nothing accidental about it. Now her name was all over Caleb's files. Email threads between the two outlined a plan. Ava would use her press connections to write a fresh start narrative for Caleb, highlighting his military service, his experience in housing development, and his vision for starting a values-driven real estate company for veterans. Ava had drafted an op-ed piece for the Chronicle, ghostwritten under Caleb's name. It painted him as a man who had walked away from a toxic relationship and was reclaiming his purpose. It didn't name me, but the phrasing made my stomach turn. I closed the file and rubbed my temples. This is calculated, I said, trying to process it. Ethan was quiet. This isn't just cheating, I said. This is reputation laundering. He's using a seasoned media expert to build a whole new identity, while burying me in the legal fallout of what he stole. I opened the next document, a brand board, logos, slogans, color palettes. He called it Helix Development. Tagline, Rebuilding with Honor. I almost laughed. He's opening a company, I whispered, more to myself. He's using stolen money, in my name, to fund a business that markets integrity. I kept scrolling, almost numbly now. Then I stopped. There it was, an image attachment. A selfie of Caleb and Ava at what looked like a beachside dinner. Wine glasses, candles. Her head tilted toward him. The caption read, To new beginnings, let's get it right this time. The date? The same night I sat home alone, wondering why Caleb missed Ethan's school award ceremony. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long time. So this was what he had built while I was doing our taxes, while I was budgeting for Ethan's summer program, while I was waking up at 5 a.m. to review hospital financials and make sure our team had enough resources for the month. He was courting headlines and lighting candles. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly beside me. You didn't deserve this. I shook my head. No one does, I said, but especially not from someone they trusted. I pulled my phone out and began taking photos of every file. I created a folder labeled *legal-initial evidence*. Are we going to expose him? Ethan asked. I looked up at him. No, I replied. Not yet. Why not? Because good stories get lost when told too early. But when you time it right, when every piece is lined up, truth speaks louder than any press release. Caleb wanted a clean narrative. Ava wanted influence. What neither of them expected was that I knew how stories work too. And I had the real one. I found out the same evening. Ethan walked into the kitchen with his laptop tucked under one arm, a quiet confidence in his step I didn't recognize at first. He waited until I finished wiping down the counter before speaking. I sent the files, he said plainly. I looked up. To who? Alicia Bourne. I blinked. The name landed like a hammer. Alicia Bourne was one of the most aggressive financial attorneys in the state. Her reputation, ruthless, clinical, brilliant. She specialized in white-collar fraud and financial abuse cases. And the last time I had seen her, she was grilling me in a deposition room over billing protocols at the military hospital. It had been a brutal lawsuit involving a mismanaged veteran care fund. I was on the internal audit team. She represented the plaintiff. We went toe-to-toe for weeks. I respected her, and I disliked her with equal measure. You contacted Alicia Bourne, I repeated. Ethan nodded, standing still. I emailed her office, from my school account. I said it was urgent, and I sent her the USB folder. I signed it with your name. I didn't speak for a moment. She replied, Ethan continued. Said she remembered you. Said she'd call first thing tomorrow. She also said, tell your mother I've always admired her ethics, even when we were on opposite sides. I turned away, processing. Alicia Bourne, the woman who once tried to dismantle my audit, who had tried to get me removed from the hospital board, convinced I was covering for mismanagement, who made me sit through 5 depositions and challenged every figure I signed off on. And now, she was our best chance. I poured myself a glass of water, trying to push aside the irony. I hope this isn't a mistake, I murmured. Ethan shrugged. She fights dirty, but she fights for the right things. That was true. For all her fire, Alicia had never taken a case that didn't reek of injustice. I sat down slowly. Do you think she'll take it? She already did, Ethan said, pulling out his phone. She's requested full documentation, notarized witness statements, and copies of all account movements from the last 6 months. I told her we're ready. My 15-year-old son had not only uncovered a financial crime, he'd retained the same legal shark who once nearly cost me my career. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I nodded. All right, I said. Then tomorrow, we begin. I got the call at 6:42 a.m. It was Caleb. He never called before noon, and never twice in a row unless something was wrong. This time, he called 3 times. I let it ring. On the 4th call, I answered. Not because I was ready, but because I already knew what it was about. His voice came through, frantic, ragged. Marianne, you need to talk to someone. Someone's messing with my accounts. My cards aren't working. The business account, frozen. I just got a message from the IRS. Marianne, they're auditing Ava's firm. What the hell is going on? I sipped my tea calmly, leaning against the kitchen counter. I imagine they're doing their jobs, I said. Caleb gasped. You think this is funny? Number. But I think it's fair, he cursed under his breath, then lowered his voice as if trying to plead. Look, this has gone too far. Ava's freaking out. We're supposed to be preparing for the launch. The media was just starting to notice us. Now she's talking about pulling out of everything. I didn't answer. I simply tapped open the online news page Ethan had forwarded me the night before. The article was titled, From Soldier to Scam Artist, The Downward Spiral of Caleb Whitmore. It wasn't from a tabloid. It was the local business paper, clean formatting, verified sources, screenshots of Caleb's shell companies, suspicious real estate acquisitions, cross-linked transfers from a family fund, and a blurred image of me, captioned, Wife, Military Hospital CFO, yet left in the dark. I stared at the headline for a moment longer than I expected to. Marianne, please, if you're doing this, stop. It's too much. You're going to ruin me. I looked out the window. Caleb, I said slowly, you did that to yourself. There was silence. Do you think Ethan doesn't see this? I continued. Do you think our son doesn't read the news? You stole his future to fund a fantasy. I needed that money for the company. You don't understand. No, I cut in. You needed that money because you wanted to build something that made you feel powerful again. You wanted a legacy. Not for Ethan, for yourself. I could hear breathing on the other end. Heavy, defeated. I'm not a bad person, he mumbled. No, I said quietly. You're just a coward who thought he'd never get caught. Then I ended the call. 3 hours later, I received an email from Alicia. It contained a PDF attachment. Notice of a formal investigation by the State Financial Crime Division. Triggered by Alicia's filings and the media leak. At the bottom was a forwarded message from an anonymous whistleblower, one of Ava's former interns, confirming Caleb had used Ava's connections to clean his name in exchange for personal gain. It was falling apart quickly now. That evening, Ava posted a statement on her social media account. I had no knowledge of Caleb Whitmore's financial misconduct. I have resigned as CEO to allow the investigation full transparency. The comments were brutal. Most people didn't care about the truth. They saw a scandal and ran with it. But Ethan came home from school and said, "It's all over TikTok." I looked up. He smiled faintly. People are remixing that headline into parody songs. I sighed. This wasn't the goal. I know, he replied. But it's kind of satisfying, isn't it? I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, a little. The first time I ever heard Ava Sinclair's voice, it wasn't in a boardroom, a courtroom, or over some smug press interview. It was on speakerphone, on Alicia Bourne's desk. I had shown up for our legal prep session, expecting paperwork and cold coffee. But the moment I stepped in, Alicia looked up and nodded toward her cell. She's on the line, and she's angry, but not at you. I froze, setting my purse down. The woman I'd imagined as calculated and complicit was crying. I didn't know, Ava's voice cracked. God help me, I didn't know that money came from a child's future. Alicia's tone was steely. And yet you helped him set up fake trusts, Ava. You polished his profile, built the illusion of legitimacy. I thought, Ava cut herself off, then sighed. I thought it was his. I thought he'd inherited a small sum from family and wanted a fresh start. Caleb never mentioned a son, never said the name Ethan, not once. I looked at Alicia. She was quiet. Then Ava added something that made my throat tighten. My little brother was supposed to go to med school, she said. But my stepfather took out loans in his name and vanished. He never recovered. So no, I don't help people who do that. I was tricked. Alicia spoke next. Then you'll cooperate fully? Yes, completely. I've already forwarded you all emails, payment trails, company filings. He used me. I get it now. There was silence. Then Alicia said, "You're doing the right thing," click. The call ended. I didn't speak for a while. Alicia slid a file toward me. Inside were screenshots of Ava's full cooperation, documents, legal statements, even a written apology addressed to Ethan. It wasn't public, not yet, but it was genuine. She didn't have to do that, I whispered. No, Alicia said, but she did. And sometimes, Marianne, people get pulled into other people's darkness without knowing. Doesn't make them innocent, but it doesn't always make them evil. I nodded, swallowing hard. Ethan came into the room an hour later. I showed him the letter. He read it twice. Then he looked up and asked, "So, do we forgive her?" I took a deep breath. "We move forward," I said. With truth, with boundaries. But maybe, yes. Ava Sinclair had been a storm I expected to fight. Instead, she became part of the flood that swept Caleb's lies away. When Alicia placed the final set of documents in front of me, documents that would trigger a full criminal prosecution against Caleb, I didn't even blink. I didn't need more evidence. I had it all. Paper trails, testimonies, Ava's cooperation, and Ethan, watching silently from the chair beside me, his face unreadable. Just 15, but his eyes had seen far too much. Alicia tapped the page with her pen. We're ready to file. Wire fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. He'll serve real time, Marianne. You'll get justice. But I didn't move. Instead, I looked down at the folder for a long time. I saw Caleb's signature. The man I had married. The man I had trusted. The man who had taken everything we built and burned it to the ground. Then I turned to Alicia and said softly, I'm not pressing criminal charges. The silence was deafening. Alicia's brow furrowed. What? I said, I repeated. I'm not pressing charges. Ethan sat forward, stunned. Mom, what? He stole from us, lied, left. That's a crime, I nodded. Yes, it is. Alicia leaned back in her chair, both hands folded. May I ask why? And I gave them the answer I'd been carrying in my chest like a stone. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for my son. I turned to Ethan. I don't want you to spend your teenage years sitting in a courtroom, testifying against your father. I don't want you watching him wear an orange jumpsuit through a bulletproof glass window. I don't want your first lesson in justice to be revenge. He didn't say anything, his jaw clenched tight. I want you to learn something deeper, I said, voice low. That justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it means choosing peace and setting boundaries that protect us without making us bitter. Alicia exhaled. You know the world won't agree. I'm not asking them to. And I knew I wouldn't be praised for it. Online, some people would call me weak. Others would say I failed to set an example, that letting Caleb walk made me complicit. I could already hear the comment threads. She should have locked him up. What kind of mother protects a man like that? She's enabling him. But they didn't know Ethan the way I did. They didn't know how much pain he masked with logic, how deeply he felt when betrayed, how fragile hope could be in the hands of a teenager watching the people he loves fall apart. I had to give him something different. We'll pursue full financial restitution, I told Alicia. Freeze his accounts, recover what we can, but no prison, no police station mugshots. Ethan looked at me, eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite name. Then he nodded and whispered, Okay. Later that night, I found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the yard. I brought him a mug of warm milk, something I hadn't done in years. He didn't say much, just sipped quietly. Then he asked, Do you think he'll ever feel guilty? I took a deep breath. I don't know, I answered honestly. But whether he does or not, that's on him. What we do next, that's on us. And in that moment, I knew. Justice, for us, wasn't about breaking someone else. It was about refusing to let them break us. It was nearly midnight when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ethan was already asleep upstairs, his bedroom light casting a soft glow onto the hallway. Floor, I opened the door to find a man in uniform standing on my porch. Older, with the kind of wear in his eyes that only time and war could etch. Mrs. Whitmore, he asked. I nodded, instantly alert. I'm Sergeant Raymond Trent. I served with your husband overseas. May I speak with you? I stepped aside. I didn't know why I let him in, but something about his voice, quiet and heavy, made me pause my judgment. He didn't come with hostility. He came carrying something else. We sat in the kitchen. I poured us both coffee. Though neither of us touched it for a while, he stared at the mug. Then finally he said, I'm not here to defend Caleb. I wouldn't have let you in if you were, I replied. He gave a weak chuckle. Fair, I figured. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out an old battered photo. Caleb, years younger, stood in a desert camp beside Raymond. They both looked tired, sunburnt, but alive. We were deployed to Al-Assad, Raymond said. 2009, logistics unit. Your husband made a mistake. I didn't flinch. That tracks. Raymond's voice slowed. He miscalculated a supply route, sent a shipment of medical supplies to the wrong sector. By the time it was corrected, the delay had consequences. A young Marine died. Internal review was swift. And you took the blame, I guessed. He nodded. I had fewer things to lose. No family, no wife, no reputation. Caleb. He was the golden one. Smart, charming, reliable. Everyone liked him. They would have discharged him. So I stepped up, said I entered the data wrong. I was demoted. But I stayed in. I folded my arms. And now you've come to collect? He looked up sharply. Number. That's not why I'm here. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't ask him for anything, Raymond said, firm. But a few months ago, he showed up at my door, said he wanted to repay the debt. I told him I didn't need money, I needed a kidney. My VA paperwork was taking forever. Dialysis was wearing me down. I figured he offered to help medically. I stared. He offered you a kidney. He offered to buy one, illegally, said it was faster. He knew someone who knew someone. I told him no. I don't want to be saved that way. That's not the kind of debt you repay with more sin. I breathed in slowly, the weight of Caleb's spiraling logic crashing over me. I think he panicked, Raymond continued. Wanted to clear his conscience but didn't know how. Said he needed money fast. Said he couldn't tell you. That part I believed. He probably told himself he was doing it for honor, for redemption, for an old friend. But at the end of the day, he stole from his own son. That wasn't duty. That was desperation wearing a disguise. Raymond stood to leave. "I'm sorry for your troubles, Mrs. Whitmore. He wasn't always like this." "No," I said quietly. "But choices build people, not memories." He paused at the iho door. "Do you think he meant well?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe. But meaning well doesn't erase the damage done." After Raymond left, I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the old photo he'd left behind. Two men who once shared meals in tents under mortar fire, now torn apart by time, guilt, and misguided redemption. I thought of Ethan. He would want to know this, not to justify Caleb, but to understand. To see that even villains sometimes think they're being noble, and more importantly, that you can choose to break the cycle. You can choose transparency, decency, even when others fall short. That night, I placed the photo in Ethan's desk drawer, not as a memory, but as a warning. 2 days after Sergeant Trent visited me, a package arrived at my office. No return address, no note. Just a thin envelope inside a military-grade folder, sealed with tape and dusted with time. I opened it cautiously, unsure what to expect, part of me already dreading what I might find. Inside were scanned documents. A formal incident report from 2009, a name redacted in black ink, except someone had carefully removed the cover with digital editing software. Beneath it, Caleb Whitmore. And on the last page, a handwritten note. "I covered for him once. That protection has an expiration date." My fingers went cold. Caleb hadn't just made a mistake in Iraq. He'd buried it. Buried it so deep he thought it would never crawl back to the surface. But it had. And now it came with interest. I drove home in silence that night, my mind racing with images. Ethan's quiet, steady eyes. Caleb's shaking hands that day he left. Trent's face, unreadable but burdened. Was Trent really just a man seeking help, or was there more? That evening, while Ethan worked on homework at the kitchen table, I pulled out the external drive where I'd stored the USB files Ethan gave me. I hadn't opened every document yet, just enough to initiate the lawsuit, to freeze Caleb's activity. But now, I needed to see deeper. I found the folder titled Temp Archives. Hidden inside were emails between Caleb and Trent. They started innocently enough. Short check-ins, updates on health, jokes about old war buddies. But then the tone shifted. "Ray, I don't have that kind of money. You owe me more than money. I saved your career. That was a lifetime ago. And now I need your silence. Help me move this, or I talk." There it was. I scrolled further. A second email showed Caleb reluctantly agreeing to transfer funds, but needing to do it discreetly. A note about Marianne's credentials being the cleanest. A reference to a college fund as untouched capital. That was it. That was why he touched Ethan's savings. Not just for Ava, not for greed, but because he'd been cornered. And he used the one thing he thought I wouldn't notice in time, my son's future. I stared at the screen, not crying, not angry, just heavy. That night, I sat beside Ethan on the couch. His laptop was open, but he wasn't typing. "I found out why he did it," I said. Ethan didn't look up. "Do I want to know?" "Yes," I said. "You deserve the full picture." I told him everything, the past mistake, the cover-up, the threat, the shame, the manipulation. He listened quietly, then finally asked, "So was he forced?" I nodded slowly. Yes, but he still had a choice. Ethan stared down at his hands, and he chose to steal from his kid. That was the part that couldn't be erased, no matter the excuse. I took a long breath. Sometimes people justify terrible things in the name of loyalty or fear or survival. But just because you can explain something doesn't mean you excuse it. That night, I rewrote my legal brief, not to seek more revenge, but to document everything with dates, emails, and motives. If Caleb ever tried to play victim, or if Trent ever tried to twist the story, I'd be ready. I wasn't just protecting Ethan's fund anymore. I was protecting his clarity and his peace. Ethan sat beside me at the dining table, his face calm but focused, as we reviewed the files together. In his hand was a printed transcript of the email chain between Caleb and Trent. On my laptop, I had bank statements, transfer logs, and 2 recorded phone calls. One between Caleb and Trent, and the other between Trent and a man with a private security firm. Every document, every piece of audio, painted a fuller picture. Caleb was just the front, Trent was the puppeteer. And I was done being the silent piece on their board. I opened a blank document and started typing. Not a report, not a legal motion, a letter, a personal one. Dear Sergeant Raymond Trent, you may not remember me clearly. I wasn't in uniform back then. I was just the wife. The quiet one at the base hospital events. The one who brought the potato salad. But I remember you. I remember how Caleb spoke of your bravery. How he said you once pulled him from a burning Humvee. I believed it then. Now I believe something else. That you used your past honor like a currency. And you spent it on leverage, blackmail, and fear. I paused, let out a slow breath, and kept going. I know what you asked Caleb to do. I know the pressure you put on him. And while he made the wrong choice, it was your hands on the strings. I'm not threatening you. This isn't extortion. This is a reminder. We once took an oath. Not just as soldiers, but as human beings. No one left behind. But that doesn't mean we excuse betrayal, especially not betrayal of a son or a family. I signed it with my full name. Marianne Whitmore, Staff Accountant, U.S. Army Medical Corps, retired. And below that, Ethan added his initials in ink. MEW and ECWI printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it to a military veterans post office box we knew Trent still used. No tracking number, no warning, just the truth, folded in paper and sealed with conviction. 2 days later, I received a short email from a burner account. I never meant for the boy to be touched. It ends here. You have my word. RT. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because sometimes you don't fight dishonor with more fire. You fight it with clarity, calm, and a name no one forgets. Whitmore. The letter came in an envelope, hand-addressed, the way people used to write when they still believed words could heal. I recognized Caleb's handwriting immediately. It was the same script he used on birthday cards, on sticky notes left on the fridge. I didn't open it. I handed it to Ethan. He looked at it in silence for a moment, then took it to the porch. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat down, opened the envelope, and read slowly. His eyes didn't blink much. His lips tightened once or twice, but he didn't cry. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the house had gone still, he handed it to me without a word. I took it to my room, sat at my desk, and unfolded the pages. There were 3, written in blue ink, with more care than I'd seen from Caleb in years. Ethan. If you're reading this, it means your mother didn't throw this in the trash. And that's more grace than I deserve. I've thought about what to say to you every night since I left. At first, I was angry at being exposed, angry that the walls closed in. But now I see that what I felt wasn't anger, it was shame. The kind that swallows you whole when you realize your son has become more of a man than you ever were. There's something you should know. Back in Iraq, I made a mistake during a routine logistics transfer. I signed off on supplies that never arrived. Our unit almost went without meds. Sergeant Raymond Trent, he covered for me, said it was his oversight. He took the heat, the reprimand, and the debt. I owed him my reputation, my next promotion, my clean file. Years later, when Trent came back into my life, he said I could repay him by helping move some money through clean family channels. I didn't ask questions, I just obeyed. And then I panicked. Your college fund was the easiest access point. I told myself I'd put it back, that you'd never know. But one lie always invites another, and before I knew it, I was gone. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I couldn't bear your eyes when you found out who I really was. I stopped reading there. My fingers trembled slightly, not out of rage, but from the complexity of it all. Guilt, cowardice, fear, they had their fingerprints on every line. I turned the page. Son, your mother taught you better than I ever could. She taught you to face things, to stay calm when others scream, to think before you strike. I see that now. I also know that I don't deserve your forgiveness. But if you ever wonder what I truly wanted to be when I was young, it wasn't a soldier or a businessman. It was someone you'd be proud to call Dad. And I failed. I'm in Montana now, working under a new name. I'm not hiding from the law. I'm just trying to rebuild, brick by brick, the man I was supposed to be. Maybe one day we'll talk again, but I'll leave that choice to you. Until then, live with your head high, son. You're already more than I ever was. Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I folded it again and placed it in a box in Ethan's drawer, next to his science medals. A few photos from when he still smiled with missing teeth. And the USB that changed our lives. Some things money ruins. But some truths, when confessed at the right time, don't fix the past, but they start to heal the present. After I finished reading Caleb's letter, I sat quietly with it in my hands, as if the weight of the paper carried the full gravity of what he'd done, and what he was trying, in his own way, to atone for. I didn't cry, I didn't feel relieved, but I did feel a stillness I hadn't known in weeks. I walked down the hallway to Ethan's room. The door was slightly ajar. He was at his desk, looking over some notes, maybe from his robotics club, maybe just something to keep his mind busy. I held out the envelope without saying anything. He looked at me, saw the letter in my hand, and didn't flinch. He took it, nodded once, and turned back to his desk. I didn't stay. I didn't ask him to read it in front of me. Some things are meant to be read in private, without eyes measuring your reactions. That night, I saw his door was closed. The light was still on. I walked past slowly, hearing nothing but the gentle rustle of paper, and for a second, the creak of his chair. The next morning, Ethan came down to breakfast as he always did. Toasted his bagel, poured orange juice. Nothing in his face told me what he felt about the letter. But I noticed one thing. When I went to clean his room later that afternoon, I found his laptop screen still on. He had a program open, a secure file erasure tool. I leaned closer. The log showed that he had deleted every archived message from Caleb's private email folder. Every screenshot, every audio snippet, every trace of his father's conversations with Trent and Ava. Gone. He'd wiped them clean, without anyone asking. I didn't say a word, but I understood. Ethan wasn't protecting Caleb. He was protecting himself. From the noise, from the temptation to retaliate further, from the shadow that could hang over him if he held on to every cruel word his father had written. That night, as I passed by his room again, I said quietly through the door, "Thank you." He didn't reply, but I heard him shift in his chair. Maybe forgiveness doesn't always come with hugs or declarations. Maybe sometimes it comes in the silence of a file erased, a choice made in solitude. Not to forget, but to stop feeding the fire. Some children grow up chasing justice. Mine chose peace. A week after Ethan erased the files, Alicia called us into her office. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, just slid a folder across the table. "I found a legal pathway," she said. "It's not simple, but it's clean." I opened the folder. Inside was a drafted plan of action with itemized notes and legal citations. It was detailed, impeccably so. Ethan leaned over to read, his eyes sharp, absorbing every line. Alicia explained. The funds Caleb had moved could be reclassified and traced. By voluntarily submitting documentation and admitting the misuse, he could avoid full criminal prosecution under a financial remediation clause, but he'd have to cooperate completely. The plan was bold. Caleb's new company account would be frozen. Ava had already distanced herself from the venture, and her cooperation meant several transactions could be reversed. The money that hadn't been spent, about half, would be returned to the original education fund under legal restructuring. The rest? It was gone, used. But Alicia had made calls to a non-profit Veterans Alliance after reviewing Caleb's military history. One of their affiliated programs offered legacy honor scholarships, specifically for children of veterans who had served in complex or morally compromised deployments. Ethan qualified. Alicia's voice softened. "It's not a handout, it's recognition, earned by what you've endured." I looked at my son. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply nodded once, processing the information like a strategist, not a boy. "And what about Caleb?" I asked. "He'll sign over everything," Alicia replied, "and agree to full disclosure with the IRS and the Board of Ethics. If he refuses, we proceed with formal charges. But if he complies, this ends with restitution." Quietly. It was more than I'd hoped for. Not vengeance, not spectacle, but resolution. That night, I stood in our kitchen, looking out at the backyard as Ethan sat at the table. I told him about the scholarship, about Alicia's terms, about how we could rebuild without dragging this through the mud any further. He didn't speak at first. Then softly, "Can I still choose where I go to college?" I smiled. "You've earned that right more than anyone I know." He got up, put his dish in the sink, and paused before walking upstairs. "I don't forgive him," he said. "But I don't want to become him either." And in that moment, I realized we'd already won. I never imagined I'd be back on a stage, certainly not for a financial seminar, and never beside her. But life has a way of folding irony into grace, if you let it. A year after everything settled, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial literacy and fraud prevention, specifically focused on family-based financial deception. The organizer wanted real stories, not theory. I hesitated at first, but Ethan encouraged me. "Tell it like it is, Mom," he said. "People need to hear it." When I arrived at the venue, the organizer smiled nervously. "There's another guest on your panel," she said. "Someone who's lived part of your story, too." And that's when I saw her, Ava Sinclair. She looked different, not guarded or proud, just human. She extended her hand. I shook it. "I didn't come here to fix reputations," she said quietly. "Just to be useful." I nodded. Then we're aligned. We sat together during the presentation briefing. The moderator didn't dramatize our backstory, just introduced us as two women who had been victims of familial fraud, who had made different choices after betrayal. When it was our turn on stage, I started. I shared how financial abuse isn't always loud. Sometimes it creeps in through trust, hidden in shared logins and quiet nights. I explained how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let myself believe stability meant safety, and how easily that illusion can be weaponized. Then Ava spoke. She admitted she once believed love could make someone honest, that because Caleb smiled at her in private and cried about his son, she assumed he couldn't be the villain. But love without truth, she said, is just performance. There was a long pause after her words. I glanced at her, not with resentment, but with something closer to understanding. And then I said the line I hadn't planned to. I used to think justice was about punishment, but it isn't. It's about clarity. Truth doesn't always need a courtroom. It just needs witnesses. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then the applause came, not thunderous, but steady, respectful. After the panel, a woman approached me in the lobby. She looked around 40, with tired eyes and a firm grip. "My sister forged my name and drained our inheritance," she said. "I was going to ruin her life in court, but now, maybe I'll just reclaim mine." That's when I knew this wasn't about Caleb anymore. It was about survival without spite, about turning damage into direction. And as Ava and I sat side by side in the quiet lounge afterward, sharing coffee instead of bitterness, I realized we weren't defined by the man we both lost. We were defined by the trust we'd chosen to rebuild. First in ourselves, and then carefully with the world. The last time I stood in an auditorium with Ethan, he was 5 years old, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in a tiny voice during a school assembly. Now, 13, he walked toward the podium of a National Youth Finance Summit with calm, upright shoulders and a quiet strength I could feel across the room. He didn't wear a suit, just a simple sweater and jeans. But when he spoke, the room leaned in, not out of pity, but out of respect. "My name is Ethan Whitmore," he said clearly. "And this year, I learned that even the people you trust most can break something you believed was unshakable, like a promise or a future." He paused. "I also learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness means choosing to live in a way that isn't ruled by what hurt you, but guided by what you can still build." I blinked fast. So did others around me. He ended with something that stayed with everyone. Sometimes justice looks like revenge, but sometimes it's just knowing the truth and choosing peace anyway. My mom taught me that. As the audience applauded, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. A woman from the conference whispered, "That boy just changed the tone of the entire event." And she was right. Afterward, as we walked to the lobby, Ethan looked up at me. "Was I too soft?" I smiled. "You were just right. Now, before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.